Hello girls and boys, welcome back to Read Me a Story. I'm Pat Kozyra. I'm not going to read you my book today, this is for your mothers and fathers to read. I'm the author of this book called Tips and Tidbits for Parents and Teachers. Mommy and Daddy can get this from AmazonBooks.com. It'll tell them all about my 50 years in the classroom and help them to help you at home. Today I'm going to read you another book of Cheryl Cannon, with wonderful illustrations by the Kelp Art team. And this book is fun because it has a lot of rhyming couplets. When the end of the sentence rhymes with the end of the next sentence, it's called a rhyming couplet. And it's called Peter and the Whimper Whineys. Ooh, I hope you're not a Whimper Whiney. And I hope my grandchildren enjoy this book too. Simon, Penelope, Charlotte, Josephine, Theo, and Max. In a house in the forest, all covered with vines, lived a very small rabbit who did nothing but whine. He'd whine and he'd cry from morning till night, and nothing that anyone did would be right. He'd cry and he'd whine, and he'd whine and he'd cry, till his mother said, "Peter, I want you to try to stop all that whining and unpleasant noise. Go take a nap, or go play with your toys. If you can't stop that whining, I very much fear that the old Whimper Whineys will look for you here. You'll go live with them in a land far away. Well, you'll join them in whining and crying all day." But Peter was selfish and cranky and cross. He wouldn't play games unless he was the boss. He'd whine and he'd cry till he got his own way. Then he'd yell at his sister who didn't want to play. His mother was fixing his dinner one night. When she heard Peter screaming, it gave her a fright. She rushed to the table and found Peter there, whining and crying, standing up on his chair. "My sister has more soup than I in her bowl. She took too much jelly to put on her roll. She's got more than I do. It's really not fair," whined Peter while sliding back down in his chair. "That's it," said his mother. "You're going to bed. Perhaps you can think about what I have said. You must stop this whining and crying you do, for no one will ever want to be around you. And standing on chairs is not safe, as you know. Your mother knows best, and I say it is so. You need to be happy and pleasant and bright, so think about that." And she turned out the light. So Peter lay back on his soft little bed while thoughts of his mother's words danced in his head. He looked out his window and saw full moon, and wished he weren't punished and stuck in his room. "I wish I were out there," he thought, and he sighed. And all of a sudden, he was standing outside. He looked at the woods in the distance and thought, "I wonder what's out there." So though he'd been taught to never go into the woods all alone, Peter went hippity-hop from his home. He went hippity-hoppity hippity-hop. At the edge of the woods, he found a big rock. When he stopped for a rest, he felt something quite queer. Something was tugging on his little ear. It tugged on his left ear and then on his right, and when Peter looked up, he saw a strange sight. He saw an old man who was dressed all in green, with a big tall green hat that was not very clean. His eyes were all swollen and puffy and red, and his gigantic nose stuck right out of his head. Peter, though frightened, just said, "Who are you?" "I've heard all the whining and crying you do," whined the strange little man with the great big red nose, who was dressed all in green, in his strange little clothes. "I'm a Whimper Whiny man, and I've come to take you to Whimper Wineland." But Peter thought, "No way," and pulled his ears free, hopped into the forest and under a tree. He waited in hiding, saw no one appear, so he wiggled his nose and he waggled his ear. And not feeling anything holding him tight, he hopped down the trail and into the night. He hopped round a bend in the trail and he found a circle of whiny men sitting on the ground. They were sitting cross-legged, those strange little men, rocking back and forth over again. "What are you doing?" Peter said with surprise, as he saw their red noses and weepy wet eyes. "We're crying a pond," whined a Whimper Whiny man. "We're whining and crying as hard as we can." "You're crying a what?" Peter thought he'd heard wrong. He was tired and thirsty from hopping so long. But the whiny man told Peter over again, "We're crying a pond for the ducks to swim in." We have so many tears in Whimper Wineland. We've made a small pond where there used to be sand. Peter wasn't too sure what he thought about that, but he saw a large table and chairs, so he sat, for he hoped he could get something to drink and to eat. The strange little men suddenly got to their feet and rushed to the table, knocking into each other, and kicking and shoving they pushed one another. They grabbed all the food with their dirty small hands and stuffed in their mouths all the food they could cram. They were licking and smacking and spitting out seeds, eating fast as they could in their terrible greed. They ate with their hands and they gobbled their food. Those Whimper Whiny men were impossibly rude. One climbed on the table. One stood on a chair. They talked with their mouths full. They seemed not to care that Peter was sitting with nothing to eat, not even some vegetables, much less some meat. After a while, someone shoved him a glass. It seemed to be milk. Peter sipped it and gasped. "This milk is sour. It really does stink. It's curdled and gross, and it's not fit to drink." One whiny man whined with a sigh and a sob, wiping grease from his chin with his sleeve like a slob. "But Peter, it seems that you don't understand. Everything's sour in Whimper Wineland. We cry our salt tears into everything here, so everything's spoiled and sour, I fear." Well, Peter thought he had had enough of this place. These men with no manners, their food a disgrace, their whining and crying the way they did shout. He knew what his mother had been talking about. He got up from his chair and crept softly away. He thought if he got home, he never would stray. He'd never go into the woods all alone, if only he could find his way home. So Peter went hippity-hoppity-hop. He kept right on hopping and didn't dare stop. He promised himself to be happy and good when he came to that rock at the edge of the wood. He saw his house waiting. It was not far to go, so he started hip-hopping, but then stubbed his toe. And Peter woke up in his own little bed. He had only been hopping in dreams in his head. His mother was calling him, saying to rise. There was sunshine outside and the bluest of skies. His mother said, "Peter, it's a beautiful day. I do hope you're going to be happy today." Do you think he was? Wow, what a story. What dreams can do. Looks like it might have helped Peter, or Let's hope that it did. Hope you enjoyed that, girls and boys, and see you next time for another story on Read Me a Story. Bye for now.